My grandmother was about 50 years old when I was born. And in every memory I have of her, every single one from my earliest childhood on, she was elderly. The dresses, the hair, the orthopedic shoes, the hard candy in the glass dish. She seemed 80 for 30 years straight. Now here's the thing that broke my brain recently. Do you remember the Golden Girls? 4 retired women in Miami, the wicker furniture, the cheesecake. Blanche, the youngest, was played by an actress who was 51 when that show premiered. The characters were written as women in their 50s. And Sophia, the little old mother with the cane and giant glasses, the actress playing her was younger than the actress playing her own daughter. If you are watching this channel, there's a decent chance that you are currently older than the Golden Girls were back then. So today I want to figure out what actually happened here. Why the adults of our childhood seem so ancient at ages we're now passing ourselves, how much of it was in our heads, how much of it was real, and then at the end, I'm going to turn the mirror around on us. Because we're not getting out of this one clean either. Let's start with the evidence, because once you see this pattern, you can't unsee it. All in the Family. Archie and Edith at the piano singing "Those Were the Days." Archie Bunker is television's definitive worn-out old man, set in his ways, done with the world, practically fused to that chair. Carol O'Connor was only 46 when that show premiered. Jean Stapleton playing Edith was 48. And this wasn't just casting choices. Look at any photo of your family from the 70s. My dad turned 40 in 1980, and if I look at a photo of him from back then, he looks like a legitimate middle-aged man. I can't remember him in t-shirts. I don't remember him ever going to concerts or listening to modern music or anything like that. Not only did he look a little bit older, he acted older. And if I put a photo from 1980 of my dad against any of the current popular actors who are like 40 now, he looked like he could be their dad. He looked so much older than they do now. Some of this gap is real and we'll get to why, but first I have to be honest about the part that isn't. Part of this is just how kids' brains work. When you're 7, a 35-year-old is impossibly old because your brain measures age in multiples of your own life. Your grandmother at 50 had been alive 7 of your lifetimes. Of course she registered as ancient. Every generation of kids does this to every generation of adults, and it proves nothing by itself. But here's why I don't think the perception explains it all, because the evidence isn't just in our memories. Hollywood in 1985 looked at a 51-year-old woman and cast her, styled her, and wrote her as elderly. And audiences found it completely believable. That's not just a child's perception. That's the whole culture agreeing on what a 50-year-old looked like. So what was actually aging people faster? Start with smoking. The generations before us smoked at rates that are hard to even picture now, and they smoked for decades before anyone actually told them the truth. The first Surgeon General's warning didn't land until 1964, when a lot of our parents and grandparents were already 20 to 30 years into this habit. Cigarettes age skin like almost nothing else, and by 50, those generations were carrying 30 years of accumulated damage on their faces. Now, Gen X, there were some high school smokers, there were some kids that smoked cigarettes and stuff, but a lot of them quit by the 90s with the campaigns that were showing that secondhand smoke was bad and all the education and stuff. I don't even have any friends that smoke at all that are my age. Another thing that caused aging was sun exposure before sunscreen was a normal thing. And I think physical labor was more intense overall, and a lot of guys by the age of 50 were worn down by then. But here's the part that people don't mention enough. The costume. In that era, 45 came with a uniform. You dressed like your mother dressed. You got a sensible haircut. There was a cultural script for what a middle-aged person wore, listened to, and did on a Saturday. And almost everyone followed it, because following it was the whole point of being an adult. Which brings me to the wall. If you grew up Gen X, you remember the adults and the kids lived in 2 separate worlds. Your parents weren't trying to relate to you. I swear, my dad could not name one popular song on the radio in 1983. He wasn't just behind on the music, he just stopped somewhere around 1959, so he only listened to stuff that was like in the 50s and earlier. And that's what adults did back then. Adults meant exiting pop culture altogether. Compare that to now. I watch my sisters with their kids and the wall just isn't there. They share music, they share jokes, they text. Part of the reason why our parents seem so much older is that acting older was, quite literally, the job description. So then Gen X came along. I think we looked at that and said, no thanks. Most of us had silent generation parents. That's the generation that earned its name by keeping its head down, conservative, careful, on script. And they raised the least on-script generation in memory, Gen X. We broke rules, we grew our hair out, we spiked it, we went new waves, snuck out, stayed out late. We loved breaking rules. That rebellion is basically what this entire YouTube channel is all about. But I think that rebellion had a longer fuse than anyone noticed at the time. Because one of the things we refused was the aging script itself. We watched our parents put on that costume at 40, and we quietly decided we were never putting it on. We also got kind of lucky with the timing. We were teenagers during the fitness craze. That got imprinted on a lot of us, and we just never stopped moving. Staying active and keeping the weight off protects your hormones and your skin in ways that compounds for decades. I even remember my sister put a refrigerator magnet on the refrigerator that said, "Nothing tastes as good as being thin feels." Which brings me to the uncomfortable part. Do we look as young as we think we look? I told you we weren't getting out clean. I'm in a few Gen X groups on Facebook. And yes, I know only old people are on Facebook, so that's kind of incriminating on its own. But people post photos of themselves in that group, and there's a whole lot of confidence about how young we all still look. Some of it's earned, but man, some of these people are delusional. I've seen people post photos where they're 55 years old and then they think they look a lot younger, but they definitely look 55 at least. If you're in any one of these groups, you know what I'm talking about. I don't ever say anything because I don't want to be rude, but come on. Every generation carries a little delusion about this, and we are not the exception. And here's the psychology of why, and it's my favorite part of this whole story. Your brain doesn't redraw familiar faces from scratch. When you look at someone you've known for decades, a spouse, an old friend, you're partly seeing the stored version, the younger version, projected onto the face you're looking at. And the person you've known the longest your entire life is yourself, the one looking in the mirror. You have never once seen your own face objectively. You see 56 blended with every version of yourself you've ever been. And the research backs this up. Most adults report feeling much younger than they are, and the gap grows every decade. Our parents may have looked in the mirror at 45 and seen someone old because the culture told them to. We look in the mirror at 56 and see someone young. Partly because we decided to, but partly because we literally cannot see ourselves accurately. This is also why when you look at a photo of yourself, you're kind of horrified. At least I am. One of my favorite poems was written by Dylan Thomas, and it's titled, "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night." This one's about living your life fully up until the end and just like not settling, and I don't know, it works for me. I just love the words, raging against the dying of the light. It just encapsulates aging for us. It's the best description of Gen X and aging that I've ever read. Our parents went gently. It was the script and they followed it at 45, in a cardigan, in a recliner. We raged, we're still raging. In the gym, in band shirts, and Facebook groups. Sometimes this raging works and sometimes it's just raging. But I know we never put on that costume, and I think that counts for something.